Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Anno Domini podcast, a content that is made, prepared very carefully, focusing on you in the local level so you can really be inspired and motivated to act in your locality, in your community. So today is the fourth day of the series, or on the series that we started on Tuesday about America's covenant with God. And today is just a wrap up. It's going to be quicker, I promise, because all I want to do today is to listen to, well, there's a video that I want you guys to watch, and we're going to talk about it together and meditate upon the content of it together based on a book that I am going to be bringing to one of the contents in a later time, especially now that we are so close to the 4th of July celebrations. And the book is called Pagan America by John David, what's his name? John Daniel Davidson. John Daniel Davidson. And he goes deep, as you will see on the video. He goes deep into the roots of everything that we have been facing today. But his final message, his conclusion to okay, so now let's understand, now that we understand the reality of our country right now, what is it that we should do? And he comes to the same conclusion, not only as myself, but as many others. All we can do right now, and the most effective action we have right now, is to be very and boldly active in the local level. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to read from the two books we have been talking about this week. One of them is the Magna Carta for Humanity. And then I'm going to read one paragraph of the book Covenant and Constitutionalism, just to wrap up the week that we had all the contents from these two books. So this is the Magna Carta of Humanity, and Dr. Os Guinness says the following. This book is a response to America's crisis by a firm and longtime admirer of the American experiment. He's talking about himself. Three major themes run through my arguments. First, the American crisis is a crisis of freedom and must be understood as such. Following Augustine of Hippo's notion that nations must be understood and assessed by what they love supremely, rather than by such factors as the size of their population and the strength of their armies, there is no question that America's supreme love is freedom. In particular, America's freedom is a unique concept of ordered freedom, as we talked about so many times and deeply on this series. America's freedom is a unique concept of ordered freedom that is the legacy of the Hebrew scriptures and of the Hebrew covenant in particular. The present American crisis of freedom, therefore, goes to the very heart of the American Republic and all that the American experiment stands for. It is a crisis whose outcome will prove as decisive as that of the Civil War. And I agree with him fully. It is also a global crisis in the sense that its outcome will be crucial for the prospects of freedom in the human nature. So what Dr. Os Guinness is talking about here is America's most precious treasure is freedom. America's most effective way of life, the lifestyle that made America what America became, was freedom and still is freedom. And pretty much that is the demise of the country at the same time. The lack of freedom comes because, well, let's talk about the achievement of freedom. The achievement of freedom, as he points out, came because of the the understanding that the forefathers and founding fathers had, that freedom came from God, number one. Number two, that your freedom is not a green light for you to do all you want to do, all of your desires, all of your appetites, all of your wills. Freedom is the capacity of not doing what we could do. So that is the restraining of the evil, corrupt nature that each one of us individuals have. So that is his point. And you lose that exactly in the same moment there that you let go of anything that transcends you, that of any superior transcendent order. And this is why he calls it ordered freedom. It's a freedom with limitations. Who limits our own freedom? Not the government, but the laws of God, the nature's God, and the capacity that God gave us to control and to refrain ourselves from doing what is wrong. So that is Dr. Os Guinness's conclusion that I'd like to bring to your attention. Of course, I really recommend you to buy the book and to read the book, meditate upon it, because it's so rich. I mean, it can help us in this dark hour so much. And here is Dr. Elisar and his conclusion that I would like to bring. This is on page 18 of his book. He says, almost 3,000 years after the covenant of Sinai, when the Israelites ratified their exodus from Pharaonic bondage and signified their consent to Moses with amens, the pilgrims who saw themselves as new Israelites embarked on a venture into their own hideous and desolate wilderness, likewise consented to a covenant with their signatures and amens. In doing so, the pilgrims introduced into North America a major stream of thought derived from the biblical idea of covenant. While often more latent than manifest since the days of the Puritans, and partially submerged within other streams and eddies of American thought and culture, especially secular constitutionalism, covenant ideas not only formed a significant part of the foundation of the United States, but have continued to influence American life in various ways. Thus, from their earliest beginnings, the people and polities comprising the United States have bound themselves together through covenants to erect their new world order, deliberately following biblical precedents. The covenant concluded on the Mayflower on November 11, 1620, remains the first hallowed document of the American constitutional tradition. A classic covenant is explicitly created. A classic covenant, it explicitly created a community and the basis for its subsequent constitutional development. John Quincy Adams, America's fifth president, once referred to the Mayflower Compact as, quote, perhaps the only instance in human history of the positive original social compact which speculative philosophers have only imagined as the only legitimate source of government. By the way, on November 11th, every single year for 6 years now, we have our public reading of the Mayflower Compact, the first charter or political social charter of the country, of back then the colonies, then the states, then the nation. So those two conclusions, those words, just wrap up and sum up everything we talked about this week. We talked a lot about freedom and how we lost it. We talked about how we crossed the line probably 100 years ago when America allowed into its veins the virus of the ignorance or the negligence or the dumping of godly principles. There is no other explanation for America's success and prosperity, as I always say, than the blessing of God as a result from the American compliance and obedience and submission to God's principles, kissing the Son. And there is no other explanation for the demise and the destruction and the nightmare that the nation has been living on for many, many decades now. There is no other explanation. The explanation is exactly the same. Those principles were let go of. Those principles were completely removed and rejected as a nation. And again, I'm not talking about specific states. I am not even talking, of course, about specific communities, because here in the Permian Basin, the cities that comprise the Permian Basin were still very strong in so many areas, and so many of those understandings of what can make us blessed and prosperous. But as a country, that does not exist anymore. Which brings me to the final lesson that I would like to leave for you in this 4-day series on America's covenant with God. It's a video from, again, John Daniel Davidson, and he wrote the book Pagan America, and he is going to explain in this 4-minute video, and I'm going to make some comments at the end, of how he's going to talk to us about what we can do. Okay, since all seems lost, since we crossed that line a long time ago, and this is our reality now. And as my good friend Herman Eben says, reality is always your friend. The fantasy is our enemy, but the reality is our friend. What can we do? What moves, what actions, what steps, what decisions, what are the options that we have now? And he is going to bring that to our attention right now. Let's take a listen.
How to respond correctly, because the American Revolution and the first century church, there were little different responses to
Yeah,
tyranny.
sure. Well, yeah, the first step, and the reason I wrote a book like this, that doesn't have sort of like a concluding chapter. It's like these 10 steps to save America. There's nothing like that in the book. The first step for Christians, I think, is to accept kind of the reality and to accept what time it is, and realize the times that we're living in and what lies ahead. Because only once you do that can you sort of like reconceptualize what our response should be, and also understand kind of the news cycles and what they mean, that these aren't one-off things, that this is a pattern, and it's only going to increase. There's not like an election. There's nobody we can elect to like solve this problem. Like, we are in a post-Christian epoch, like in the life of the world, historical epoch, and that there's huge consequences to that. Um, so one of the things, the first thing, is to just understand what's happening and understand why it's happening, and accept it. And then the second thing is to find and fight on ground you can win. And by that I mean, you're not going to turn around like Los Angeles or California as a state. But maybe you can turn your town around, your community. Maybe you can take over your city council. Maybe you can take over the library, right? And get the pornographic books out of it. Maybe you can even take over your school board, and get some of these materials out of the public schools. But the point is, there's nowhere you can hide. So you have to fight. And so the question is, what ground will you fight on? And do you have a chance of carving out um, carving out a space for you and your family and your community to be able to live in accordance with your faith, and to bring the principles of the Christian faith, as they once were all throughout this country, bring them back into the public square, and indeed, back to the forefront, right? So, in monuments and proclamations and parades and in curriculum, right? Proclaiming the faith unabashedly, the way that we did in this country right up until the middle of the last century. Uh, you have to start thinking about ways to do that, locally, at the hyper local level, and in places where it's possible. right?
Yeah.
And I mean, not to make it too personal, but it's one of the reasons that I left a big city, even a big city in deep red Texas.
Yeah, it's
As,
Austin.
well, as you know, Texas is not as red as it seems.
Well,
But
and Austin is Austin's the liberal island, but island sounds too generous. Yes. Anyway,
but even the rest of Texas is not as red as it
no,
seems.
that's true.
But that is that's part of the challenge, is thinking about ways to create space and be bold, be bold in the proclamation of the faith, and to say our faith and our values mean that we're not going to have these pornographic books in the public library.
Yeah.
We're going to get rid of them. And if the people who are in charge of the library don't do that, we're going to fire them all. We're going to get this stuff out of our schools. We're going to have a Christmas parade that proclaims the birth of Jesus Christ, and we're going to do it on the public dime. And if there's court battles, then we'll fight those court battles. If there's protests, we'll weather those protests. We'll have counter protests, but we're not going to take it lying down, and we're not going to retreat into our own communities. We're gonna proclaim the faith and proclaim a Christian civilization in the public square.
Yeah, and with a nice Christian attitude, because you can do
That's
both.
right.
All right, Pagan America is available right now wherever you get books by John Daniel Davidson.
So there you go. Local level, local level, local level. Action, not omission. This is our calling right now. Since we probably are not able, we will not be able to renovate, restore, recover, transform Washington, D.C. or Austin anymore, our capitals, our state capitals, but our nation's capital. We have the responsibility of protecting, as my wife always says, our Garden of Eden, our local community. Let's fight for our children. Let's fight for your youth, our young people, or our elderlies. Let's fight for our local community. And this is something that all of us are called to do. The first thing is to spread the news, to spread the gospel of Christ, to spread the news about the covenant that 400 years ago and consolidated 250 years ago, our forefathers and founding fathers decided, knowing, understanding what it meant for them and what it means for us today, that they dedicated this nation to the God of Israel. So again, guys, as I started from in the beginning on Tuesday, and I wanted to wrap up exactly on the same point, I am not talking about God's covenant with America, because this is not biblical. It's nowhere to be found in the Word of God. But I am talking about the offering to God, the dedication to God from human beings that crossed the Atlantic Ocean in 1613, Jamestown, and 1620, especially Plymouth Rock. I'm talking about the intent, the goal, the desire of those people's hearts to establish a community in which they could freely worship God and submit to Christian principles and kingdom law. And what they did was much more than that. As we read on Psalm chapter 2, I don't know, I probably believe they had that consciousness, because many of those people that came, especially the preachers, they understood and they practiced the idea that the kingdom of God was here now, meaning 400 years ago, that should not expect a kingdom to come in the future, but that King Jesus had been crowned 400 years ago. We can say that they were thinking about 1600 years earlier, that Jesus had been crowned as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and every knee should bow to him, and every nation should kiss the Son. They understood that. That is the same understanding that we have to proclaim as heralds, as ambassadors, as spokespeople to the King of Kings in our communities today. As John said, we just need to Proclaim it so loud in a way that sin and anything that is related to evil in our communities, for example, the pornographic books in our library, it cannot stand. This cannot stand. And if we act, if we do not omit ourselves, if we do not keep our swords in the sheath in times of war, as we are right now in a time of war, the Lord will bless us. And maybe we don't see the results and the fruits of that, of our fight, but our future generations will be blessed. God is a God of generations. Everything we do today, in God's mind and in God's heart, He wants it to affect not only our lives right now, but our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and so on and so forth. So my last call for you today is, I would like to, one more time, to invite all of you. I will be sending messages and specific information out later today and tomorrow and on Sunday and on Monday about the public reading of the Declaration of Independence in a moment of prayer for America here in Midland, between Midland and Odessa, Highway 191 at the cross on 191. We'll be there at 7 a.m. early in the morning so that the sun does not castigate all of us. We want for it to be a very, very special moment. So if you are listening to this message right now, if you're watching this video and you live here in Midland, Odessa, Andrews, Stanton, San Angelo, here in the region, please show up if you can and join us in this moment of reading, bringing those principles back to to the forefront of our reality today, but at the same time, a moment to repent, a moment to be broken in God's presence as God's people. And we're going to pray and intercede for this country, especially for our city and our local communities. So may the Lord bless you. And I see you for episode 18 next Monday here at the Anno Domini podcast. Bye-bye.